All right, we'll go ahead and get started now. I'd first like to let you know that your video is off and that you'll be muted throughout the entire presentation. So you can use the chat function. I see some folks already doing that to add your comments. And if you have specific questions for the presenters, please write them in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. I also wanted to let you know that we'll be sending the slides, the recording, resources, and also a certificate of attendance after the presentation. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Carolyn Pralot. I'm Senior Policy Analyst for Early Edge California, and I'd like to welcome our partners from Sobrato Early Academic Language, also known as SEAL, who will be presenting their webinar, Empowering Families to Develop Oral Language in Everyday Life Using Home Language. We have with us today Patricia Montes Pate. She's Preschool Program Coordinator for SEAL, and she's also a specialist in bilingual education and curricular design. And we also have with us Ana Marisol Sanchez. She's Program Specialist for SEAL and has more than 20 years of experience in education. So welcome, Patricia and Ana Marisol.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As Carolyn said, my name is Patricia, and I am the Preschool Program Coordinator for SEAL. We are thrilled to be here with you. And first and foremost, we would just like to thank Early Edge for inviting us to be part of this webinar series that they've been hosting for teachers during distance learning. Both Marisol and I work for SEAL, which stands for Sobrato Early Academic Language. So we are a nonprofit organization committed to ensuring all dual language learners and English language learners learn, thrive, and lead. We are an organization firmly rooted in equity and justice, who strives to disrupt the systems of oppression in education by placing dual language learners, English learners, at the heart. We do this by partnering with public education agencies across the state to transform their systems through professional learning and technical assistance. SEAL fosters system change in two ways: by transforming classrooms, schools, and districts, and by advocating for state-level changes that focus on the needs of dual language learners and English learners. To learn more about our organization and the work we do, we invite you to visit our website at seal.org. So our goal for this webinar is to raise awareness on the power of home language and how through two-way communication, we can partner with families in supporting children's language development. During this difficult time, we recognize how important it is for children to be able to express themselves, their emotions, their sense of joy and happiness, as well as their anger and frustration. So we'll share some specific strategies and ways to promote children's social, emotional, and positive identity development through meaningful conversations at school and at home. By looking at this graph, we see the percentage of children's languages in California schools. So in California, nearly 60% of children 5 and under live in homes where a language other than English is spoken. The term dual language learner is used to refer to children birth to 5 who are learning 2 or more languages simultaneously, or who are learning a second language while developing their home language. And as you can see, the vast majority of English learners, 82%, speak Spanish at home. So we know that California is a very diverse state. And although Proposition 58 passed in 2016, which gave schools more control over dual language programs, we were living in an era of English-only instruction in public schools for almost 20 years. And as a result of this, there are still many myths that persist about bilingualism. Learning 2 languages confuses children. Speaking their home language will hinder children's development of English. Children will maintain their home language while they learn English. And we know that this is not the case. Recent studies show the many benefits of being bilingual. It is important to note that the advantages are greater for individuals who have higher levels of proficiency in both languages. In 2017, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a report that describes the capacities of and influences on dual language learners' language development. And these are some of the key findings which are critical for us who are working with young children and their families. To begin with, all children, given the appropriate opportunities, have the capacity to learn 2 or more languages. Birth to 7 is the optimal time for learning a language with near native-like proficiency. Building a strong base in child's home language supports their development of English. And the quality and quantity of input by good language models is important to language development. Children need systematic and simultaneous exposure to both languages. And last but not least, it's important for us to know that early exposure to English can result in loss of home language. We know that English has tremendous language power and status, and if we create environments that do not take children's home languages into account, studies show that children will begin to lose their home language. So it's important for us that we partner with families and prevent this from happening. The full NASEM report is approximately 500 pages, and some of you may be looking for a good summer read, so we encourage you to do so. However, some of us may find this writing a bit dry, and so Celia has written a 6-page brief summarizing its research. We've also compiled a list of frequently asked questions by teachers and families around dual language learners in preschool, and both of these resources will be available for you after the webinar. In addition, we also have a short video clip that we'd like to share with you, which speaks to the importance of honoring and affirming children's languages, cultures, and identities.
For the early childhood educator, creating an environment in which all children feel affirmed, feel welcomed, feel they belong, feel a sense of safety is one of the major tasks that we really have. And it's our job to figure out how we do that with children who come from cultures and languages and diverse life experiences that may or may not be our own, that they don't necessarily share with the other children in the program. A key part of identity, a key part of experience is our language. And for dual language learners particularly, coming to school with a language other than English and being immersed often in an English world. Does the language that I know have a place here? Does the language in which I express myself understood here, invited here? But even if they do understand the language of the teachers, that sense of who I am and my language is very, very important. This is such an important part of early childhood that it's actually written into many of the foundational principles and tenets and even standards in preschool foundations that we work from as a field. Underlying all of these is the understanding that children need the confidence and the competence and the sense of empathy to really reach across differences and to really know who they are.
Okay, so we know that in order to create these rich environments where children's languages, their cultures, and identities are represented and affirmed, we need to partner with families. Children's success depends on us building strong relationships and partnerships between families and schools, and establishing that positive two-way communication between the home and the school is essential to this work. Both Head Start and the California Department of Education recognize the importance of gathering this information on the language experiences of children and their families. So they have created documents with a list of possible questions to ask families. It's important that we begin our work gathering this information so we can intentionally work with families on how to best support their children at school and in the home. I'm now going to turn it over to my partner, Marisol, who will continue with our presentation.
Thank you, Patricia. Good afternoon. I'm Ana Marisol, and I'm very happy to be with you today. So as we heard in the video, affirming children's languages and cultures develops a positive sense of identity. In addition, children need to learn how to have the confidence to express themselves and have empathy for others. Therefore, today, we will be focusing on two critical aspects: social emotional and positive identity development. And what is bridging these two worlds of child development is family conversations, and these happening in the home language. One of the most powerful roles families can play in supporting children's language development is to engage in rich conversations using complex, expressive language, and this is best accomplished when using the home language. And I just want to point out that our color coding, since it's going to be repeated throughout our slides, blue is going to indicate school, whether it's in a virtual setting or in person, and green are activities that are going to be happening at home. And the red arrow that you'll see reappearing will be a reminder of those family conversations in the home language that we're going to be trying to encourage them to have. So what are these family conversations and projects that we're talking about? These are activities that are intentionally open-ended. There's no right or wrong answer, do not require that families have background knowledge, and should occur in the family's home language, which means we need to be providing these with translations for our families to be able to have them participate. And basically, the purpose of the family conversations is to empower families to capitalize on their use of home language in meaningful ways. So we want to be able to provide these with you. We're going to be providing these with you, these examples, both in English and Spanish. And these activities lend themselves to these rich family conversations that we're going to hope parents have with their kids. We're also going to be giving you this as a menu of activities, but you might want to send these as individual activities for families to use. So first, we're going to focus on social emotional development. At school or guided by the teacher, the language of feelings and emotions is taught. Children need this language to express themselves and share how they're feeling. Several strategies are used to support the work around a variety of emotions, and we're going to share some of those with you. At home, the idea is that families would be encouraged to extend some of that work that happens with the teacher while engaging in these family conversation activities. So here are the strategies that we're going to be sharing with you that support social emotional development. The first one is going to be literature and discussion about feelings and emotions, making use of literature to be able to have these discussions, a chart of emotions, routine check-ins, and a web of joy. Again, with family conversations serving as that bridge. And I just want to say that we fully recognize that some of you are either officially completed with your year, others of you are working year-round, some sites have opened for children, families who are essential workers. And in any of these scenarios, the strategies that we're going to be sharing with you can be implemented either now or when you begin in the fall. So our first strategy, making use of literature to support social and emotional development, books are a great way, a great entry point to introduce vocabulary and to facilitate discussions about feelings and emotions. And one book that we found to be very useful around this work is When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry by Molly Bang. This is available in both English and Spanish, just in case you wanted to know that. And some of you might be familiar with this book, but I'm going to share a few pages with you just to give you the gist. And I just want to say before we move on that I want to be clear that our goal is not to model how to deliver an interactive read aloud, but to show you how books can be used to support work around feelings and emotions and sort of serve as a springboard for those rich family conversations to occur. So in the story, Sophie's playing with her toy gorilla when her sister comes along and grabs it from her. Sophie gets very upset. So at this point, you might want to pause and have children focus on her body language, on how tense she looks, how she's holding her fists. And here, Sophie is so upset. In fact, she cries. Again, this is another opportunity to pause, to have children focus on those visual cues. The body is hunched over, her head is looking down. Here she climbs a tree and starts to feel calm, peaceful. She focuses on the beauty of nature. And in the end, Sophie returns home and her family welcomes her with open arms. And to really, capitalize on the fact that this book has so much rich language during the reading, we would want you to pause and have discussions about how Sophie was feeling, engaging the children in discussing what did she do to calm herself down? How did she self-soothe? What else could she have done? What strategies did she practice? What do you do to calm yourself down? And so the second strategy that sort of builds off of that literature of feelings and emotions is creating a chart of emotions where children physically express the emotions and can become a resource for children to reference later. We know that physical and visual cues are important for children. At this age, emotions typically get expressed in nonverbal ways. However, along with learning to recognize body language, we really want to emphasize and be sure to model and expose them to sophisticated words that they can attach to those emotions so that they can be able to express themselves orally. And as much as possible, being able to provide the words in the children's home language whenever you can. So then families, what happens with all of this that has happened with the teacher? The families can continue to support this work by engaging in conversations in which they talk about their feelings and their emotions, narrating what they see the child doing, helping them to verbalize their feelings. And these are, in the moment conversations, attaching emotions to what the child is feeling in the moment. And then doing this, obviously, to support home language, doing this in the home language. And letting the parents know that that's sort of what we want them to be doing. Additionally, here's an extension. Families can create a chart of emotions with their child, making all the faces that depict those emotions. This is Noah, and these are the different ways that he's been feeling lately. Or families can create a book of emotions. This is Nathaniel, and again, these are his feelings. We want to encourage families to provide synonyms. Like this one's in Spanish, alegre, contento, feliz, but could be happy, glad, joyous, depending on what the language is. But we want to encourage families to be able to provide these synonyms to expose children also to a variety of feelings and emotions with complex vocabulary. So rather than just using regular happy, sad, that it would be a word like indeciso, indecisive, if possible providing that English translation. And it could just be just simply taking a look in the mirror and making faces of various emotions with your child and doing it together with their children, I mean. So both the chart and the book can be used at home as resources to help children to be able to express their emotions and later on. And when different emotions surface, then more can be added. But I do want to say one thing. I do want to emphasize this very highly, that while both the chart and the book are great and we would want families to create them, the point really is that family conversations happen and that they're happening in the home language and that those conversations are all about emotions and feelings. Other resources that we will be providing you with is a list of emotional and feeling words that you can share with families. We have these in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. A chart also that we are going to be providing you is this teaching pyramid model. If you're familiar with that, we're also going to be providing you that as a resource. And again, both of these can be shared with families. Another strategy that we want to share with you is the idea of having routine check-ins with your preschoolers at the beginning and at the end of your class meetings, whether those are virtual or not. This just gets children, into the routine of sharing and expressing their feelings and hearing others. You can also have them draw pictures depicting how they feel. But the key thing here, the important thing, is also for you as a teacher to model and share how you are feeling. For example, if you've made arrangements with a parent to share some of the things that are happening at home, it could be like you share, "I'm feeling so excited today because Noah's mom is going to come and teach us. She's going to teach us a song in Spanish." So again, having that be a routine, that expressing one's feelings is something that happens on a daily basis. And similarly at home, we want to encourage families to have those daily conversations with their children, reflecting on the highlights and challenges of the day and the emotions that were experienced. And of course, encouraging parents or caregivers to share their own feelings is important, because they're the models at home, right? So we're the models when we have them with us, but then the parents are also the models at home. And so we want to empower the families to and encourage them to be able to share their own feelings with their children as well. I'm going to pass it over to Patricia, and she is actually going to be sharing an activity focusing entirely on joy.
Great, thank you. So the fourth strategy we want to share with you today is the web of joy. And although children experience a wide range of emotions, in this strategy, we want to explicitly focus on that feeling of joy by talking about this emotion and the many things that bring joy to our lives. So to do so, as the teacher, you'd need to plan ahead, thinking about who or what brings you joy, and possibly print out some photos or visuals to add to the web as you create it in front of the children. You can also, of course, model making sketches or drawings. As you can see here in the center, you can write the word joy or perhaps place a picture of yourself, and then just one by one, begin sharing the many things that bring you joy. So here's an example that I created. And one of the things that brings me joy is taking walks in the forest and seeing all the trees with their unique leaves and shapes. I like to bring my binoculars with me so I can see the different birds that are perched on the branches. And you can just imagine, as you're expressing this and sharing this with the children, the languages and the vocabulary that you're exposing them to. So we would continue adding to the web in this fashion, one by one, sharing those items that bring us joy. Then at home, we would invite families to brainstorm and have that conversation, have that discussion about all the things that bring their child joy. Of course, a possible extension to this would be to have the family support their child in creating their own web of joy. So you can see in this example that the child enjoys eating pineapples and pasta, and they've actually taken some real pasta and glued it onto the web. She has a favorite stuffed animal that she sleeps with every night. She drew a picture of her family because of course they bring her joy, and you can see it's comprised of her mother, her brother, her grandmother, and herself. And she also added a picture of her friend because she enjoys playing with her. And then she also added some crayons because she loves to color. So we would encourage families to post these somewhere in the house where it's visible. It could be posted on the refrigerator in the kitchen or the child's room. But the idea really is that families would return to this poster and add ideas, continue adding those things that bring the child joy. Similarly, families can use this as a reference. So when the child is feeling sad or upset, they can return to this web of joy and talk about some of those things that they might want to do in the moment to help calm that child down and make them feel joyful again. So it's a reminder, again, of what brings us joy. Another extension would be to create a family web of joy and have all the family members contribute. What are the things that we can do together as a family that bring us joy? So these are the 4 strategies and family conversations that support children's social, emotional, and language development. And again, what we want to emphasize is the importance of having children and families share the work they did at home. So this creates that environment which values and affirms children and their families. And it also provides us as teachers and staff with pertinent information into who these children are, what are their family experiences, and how can we incorporate this learning, make connections to the school setting. So I'm going to pass it back to Marisol, who will move us on to the second aspect of positive identity development.
Thank you again, Patricia. So now we're going to move on to this second critical aspect, positive identity development. And really what we're talking about here is building a positive sense of self-identity. We know it's a major developmental task for young children. So we want to create an environment where children's language and culture are affirmed, because we know that that's how they learn best, when they feel safe, when they feel supported. And so at home, families would be encouraged to extend some of that work while engaging in family conversation activities. So we're going to share 5 different ways to be able to support positive identity development. First, we're going to continue with using literature to be able to discuss, and we're going to do this discussion is going to be around names. We are going to share a strategy with you called The Story of My Name. We're also going to be sharing with you a poster, an I Am Called poster. We're going to be talking about how family photos can be used. And we're also going to be focusing in on special food or special items that we can share within the group that we have or with families. And with family conversations in the home language continuing to be what connects both. So as we continue to make use of literature, this time we're going to be using this specific book. We're going to be sharing this with you. It's Alma and How She Got Her Name. And we're going to use this to have the discussion around names. And I just want to say that whereas in the foundations, there's a big emphasis for preschoolers to be able to write their names, we want to go beyond that and draw attention to the feelings and stories behind our names, because they're a huge part of our identity. And so I'm going to read a couple of pages so that you can get the sense of what we mean. And this is Alma and How She Got Her Name. So it's a story about a little girl who doesn't care so much for her name because she thinks it's too long. Alma Sofia Esperanza Pura Candela had a long name. Too long, if you asked her. My name is so long, Daddy. It never fits, Alma said. Come here, he said. Let me tell you the story of your name. Then you decide if it fits. So I'm going to give you just one example of how the father shares all of the different parts of her name. This is the part where he shares how she got Sophia. She's named after her grandmother. So it says, Sophia was your grandmother, he began. She loved poetry, jasmine flowers, and of course me. She was the one who taught me how to read. I love books and flowers. And you, Daddy? I am Sophia. So the father continues telling her the story about her name. And in the end, she realizes that Alma, Sofia, Esperanza, Jose, Pura Candela, that's my name. I am Alma, and I have a story to tell. So after reading the story, you'd have a discussion with the children about Alma's experience with her name, how she felt at the beginning, and how her feelings about her name changed and transpired as she learned more about it. So we would also encourage you to share your own story of your name. There's a lot of power in you being the model and just kind of putting yourself out there so that they can hear a model of what the story behind a people's name is. So here's my story. My name is Ana Marisol, and Ana came from the patron saint of Santa Ana in the city that I was born in El Salvador. I was born in Santa Ana, El Salvador. My mother made a promise that if I was born healthy, she would name me after the Virgin Santa Ana. So that's where Ana came from. But then my parents also named me Marisol. And this was after a Spanish actress in the 70s who was supposed super famous at that time and popular. But what my parents told me is that the reason they did that is because she was very independent and she was strong-willed and traveled all over the world, just the things that my parents dreamed about for me. And so that's the story of my name. So as you can see, it's, we all have stories of our names. Some are short, some are long, but there's stories behind the reason we are named the way we are. And so at home, we want to encourage families to have those similar conversations, to have families share the story of the child's name with them. And we want to encourage families to share the stories behind the child's name, but then also share the story behind their name so that the children begin to understand their own history and then continue to build that positive sense of self, and then that positive self, the positive sense of identity as well. And as a possible extension, families can write the story of their children and their children's name. The children can draw themselves, and families can print a picture, or not necessary to print a picture, but if they have a picture already, this could be a really special keepsake. I actually have this for my boys when they were little. I still have it. But families can share these stories also behind their own names and behind the stories behind other family members in the home. Another strategy that can be used to promote positive self-identity is to bring awareness to the various names that are part of one's identity. And this strategy is called the I am called poster. You would want to model this by creating your own I am called poster. And in the center, you write your name. And then for each spoke, you'd write a nickname or a term of endearment that those closest to you use to refer to you. And you can see here my example. My name is Marisol, but there's other names that I embrace and are part of who I am. My children call me Mom, and that feels super special to me. My husband calls me Sweetie, and my students call me Miss Sanchez. But all of those names hold significance, and they make me feel proud and unique. I noticed that in this example, I used a mixture of photographs and sketches to make this more personal, but also to support comprehension. And so at home, the family conversation would then be to have families reflect with their children about the different names that people use to refer to them. For example, by someone who loves them, by a friend or a sibling, a mom, or a teacher. Here's an example of a child's I am called poster. This is Green Yeli, who is called Green by her mother and Green Yelita by her grandma. You remember, this could also be done with the actual artifact. Again, it would be great if you have the artifact, but the point here is that we want to encourage families to have these meaningful conversations and engage their children in a discussion about the different names, and maybe even using fingers, like my daddy calls me baby, my grandma calls me Quinelita, my friends call me Quineli, my mom calls me Quin. So that doesn't actually have to be the artifact itself, but it's about the conversation and the discussion that one has around the different ways that different words and different names that people use to refer to us. And I'm going to pass it over to And actually, I did want to make one point before I move on with this main thing. What we're not saying is that when children come into schools, teachers or everyone changes their name. What we're saying is that there are these other terms of endearment that others that are closest to the child will use to refer to them, and that they respond well to those. Not to say that when they come to us, we change their names and call them something different. So I just wanted to make that point here. And yeah, I'm going to send it over to Patricia, who's going to talk to us about family photos.
Thank you. And so I have the pleasure of sharing with you our fourth strategy under positive identity development. And this focuses on the importance of sharing memorable family events and experiences. So to introduce this concept, we are recommending using the book Family Pictures by Carmen Lomas Garza. So she is a Mexican-American artist who creates paintings of her memories growing up in Texas and writes a brief story of each. So here we have one of her paintings. It's called Sangria, or Watermelon, and she writes, "It was a hot summer evening. The whole family was on the front porch. My grandfather had brought us some watermelons that afternoon. We put them in the refrigerator and let them chill down. After supper, we went out to the front porch. My father cut the watermelon and gave each one of us a slice. It was fun to sit out there. The light was so bright on the porch that you couldn't even see beyond the edge of the lit area. It was like being in our own little world." So after sharing the book with the children, you would share some of your own family photos of memorable events and stories. So here is a picture of the day when we brought our youngest daughter home from the hospital, and her big sister was anxiously awaiting for us. She was right there at the door waiting for us to come in, and as soon as we got home, all she wanted to do was to hold the baby and to give her her bottle. And so, of course, with a newborn, parents are always nervous, but I propped up some pillows and I showed her how to gently place her arm under the baby's neck for support, and then carefully, showed her how to insert the bottle into her sister's mouth. And I can still remember the day of how proud she was of herself. And so I just love having this photo, which captured such a very special moment in our lives. So in the process of sharing these special moments with one another, we are developing language, and we're learning about each other's lives, we're building that positive community that we want to have, and we're also affirming children's identity and experiences. So in their home language, we would ask families to do the same, to view family photos together with the child and share the stories and memories of the people, of the events that are taking place. And then, of course, as part of that conversation, we want to encourage families to use language that expresses how they feel when they see the photo or how they felt on the day that that picture was taken. Another strategy is to focus on special foods. So we all have certain foods, meals that we prepare that are associated with family traditions and celebrations. And once again, we use literature to bring this into our classroom. So one book that supports this work is Too Many Tamales by Gary Soto. This is a story about a little girl named Maria who makes tamales with her mother and father as part of their holiday tradition. And the problem arises when she puts on her mother's ring, which she then loses while kneading the masa. So it's a great and engaging story to share, and then bring up this concept about important foods that are connected to our culture, to our traditions, to our identity. As always, we encourage you to share your own examples. So you can see at the bottom, I too, this is part of my culture, my tradition. And I have there a picture of my mom and my two girls kneading the masa, and such special memories that are created during this time. This story also lends itself to sharing stories about special items that are important to us. So in the story, once again, focusing on the ring, which have significant value to the family, right? So you could then share specific items that are meaningful to you and what's the story behind them? So here I have, once again, a picture of a collection that I've started. Every time our family travels somewhere, I look for figurines, figures that represent mothers and their children, and I can share those stories with my children. So after sharing these examples with the children, we would invite the families to do the same, right? As they're cooking, as they're preparing meals, just sharing stories about important foods and the celebrations that are connected to them. We want to invite families to also share items that hold significant value to their family and the stories behind those. So it could be a special guitar or a piece of jewelry that belonged to a loved one and was handed down to this, but just seeing the significance, learning that history that is very much a part of who we are. And again, with all of these strategies and family conversations, the idea is really to promote language development. And by having the families engage in their conversations in their home language, where they can use that rich, expressive, complex vocabulary to share all these wonderful stories that are part of a child's identity. And very, very important to have the children, to have the families share these stories with the class, invite them to bring those photos, to bring those special items that are near and dear to them as a way of strengthening that partnership between the school and the home and learning just more about the children and the families that we serve. So in closing, we do want to share one last resource that we have for you, which is a family letter we created, which really speaks about the importance of home language and how families can support language development in everyday life. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this amazing information. We'll now take a few minutes to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to add your questions here to the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. So we will be sending you guys an email in a few days with the slides, the recording to the webinar, the resources, and also a certificate of attendance. So be on the lookout for that. Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Yes, please ask away.
We wanted to save a little time at the end just to give you guys time to ask. Here we have a question about how do you think we're going to keep the relationships with family and teachers alive with the COVID-19?
Yeah, I think, depending on the format that you have, Ray, if you're checking in virtually with the families, doing that in a small, you could even do a one-on-one conversation with them. It could be via the phone, but I think more so than ever, it's going to be work on our end to make sure that we keep that relationship going. It was a lot easier to do so when we were face-to-face and we'd see the families dropping off or picking up their children. But we're going to have to go that extra mile. And I think that through those conversations, through virtual meetings, online, FaceTime, whatever method you're using, it's still going to be recognized and valued, and families are going to see the extra effort that you're putting in.
Great. We have another question about what is the best way to transfer this to distance learning?
I think that all of these strategies actually can be done virtually. So if you are using, I know some teachers are using Google Hangouts, Google Meets, others might be doing some form of webinar, but using that time when you have with the children to read the book, you could also have small group settings where you virtually pull a few of the children to be able to share some of the stories, invite the families to be part of those conversations. So when you're live with the children virtually, they're sitting right there next to them and they're helping to share what these discussions, their posters, their books, etc., that they've created together with one another.
And
Great.
the beauty too, the opportunity, I guess you could say, of doing this in the virtual format is that you can chunk, the story. And you notice how we only showed you just a few pages just to give you the gist, and it was just enough to be able to spark some discussion around it. And so the beauty of now being in this virtual format is that you can do that. You can focus on one page, focus on 2 pages, that you're really going to enrich that discussion across with the kiddos. Because we know, I mean, they're 3 and 4 year olds. So, of course the attention isn't, it's limited. And so knowing also that what you present in the time that you have them has a rich connection to something that the parents can then follow up with as extensions.
Great. We have some questions about the list of books, if the books are online, if we have a list of books or resources about emotions.
We do have the list of the words that we are, that are part of the resources that we showed in the PowerPoint. But Patricia, you want to say something more about the books?
I was just going to say that all the books that we've shared with you today, you will receive a document that lists them all, both in English and in Spanish. Some of them are available on YouTube. Other teachers have gone on and recorded themselves, but children always love seeing their own teachers. So if you have the ability to do so, we encourage you to check out the book from the library. I've heard those services will be returning soon, and record yourself and be able to share that link with families via YouTube or whichever means you're using.
Wonderful. Some folks want to know about the next webinar, and actually we have a second one coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be on June 24th, and when we send out the recording and the resources, we'll send out a link so that you can sign up for that one as well. We have several other questions. We have questions about whether there are suggestions for working with infants and toddlers.
So for working for infants and toddlers, there I think it's just modeling the language and talking with the families, engaging with that conversation and continuing, it could be their favorite rattle or their favorite toy, and just focusing on one item as opposed to a plethora of items that you might do so with the preschooler. So just, I think one of the biggest things we could do is make those connections with the families so that we can know how to best support their child in their care.
Wonderful. And we have a question from our wonderful Lori Olson. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lori. Hi, Lori.
She wants to know, that you mentioned complex, rich, expressive language a lot, but could you give some more examples of what you mean by that and how you encourage families to use that kind of language?
Thank you, Lori, for your question. Right. So when a child is sad, right, and they're crying, so instead of saying, "Oh, I got it, I can see that you're sad," it's really saying, "Oh, sweetie, honey," whatever you call your child, like, "I see that you're so upset. Your shoulders are shrugging, tears are streaming down from your face," like really narrating all of those characteristics, those physical gestures and so forth that you see that child portraying at that time at the moment. And again, you yourself, if you're upset, like, the dishes haven't been cleaned in a few days or whatever. "Oh my gosh, I'm so upset. I can't believe these dishes." I'm, just really expressing and articulating instead of just saying, "I can see you're sad. I can see you're upset," but making that language rich, stretching it out and really capitalizing on that language. So thank you, Lori, for that.
Yes. We have some questions about the family language form that you shared and whether they can have a copy of that, as well as the template of the name poster.
So the family interviews are available through CD and Head Start, but we have actually pulled them from their websites, and we'll be sharing them as part of the link that Early Edge will be sending out to all the participants who were part of this. And then the name poster that I am called is simply a web. It's a circle with lines, but if you would like for us to draw one just as a reminder for you, we're happy to do so.
Definitely can do that.
We have another question about COVID, a little similar to the other one, but due to COVID, what changes will you be implementing when it comes to family involvement and engagement events?
Right, so for that, I would ask you to join us at our next webinar, and we will be able to share that information with you.
Great, and then another question about any thoughts on children who only speak English at home?
In terms of supporting them to acquire a second language?
Maybe.
I think, again, there's so many resources online. So if families are only speaking, and I'm assuming that it's an English speaking home, perhaps, you know, if the teacher or staff have been able to video record themselves reading a book in another language, then they can have access to that, or looking up on YouTube different ways to expose children to a specific or target language. So there's many ways of still continuing this growth around the beauty of languages in our homes.
Great. We have one about, do you have specific resources or research you share with families who are worried that their children will not do well in school if they use their home language?
So we have that Q&A when we were talking about the NASEM brief. There's also a list of questions, and I believe one of those questions is around how home language actually supports the acquisition of English and acquiring that language.
And that is a resource we're going to be sharing with everybody, that Q&A.
Great. There's a question about copyright issues while reading online. Can you share any information you may have on this? I'm aware of a New America article that we can share the link with you that talks a little bit about that. And then there was also a question about URLs to support dual language, to support families. And actually on our website, Early Edge California, we have several resource pages, one for families and one for teachers of DLLs. So we can share those links as well.
Well, and I'll just do a plug for you, Carolyn, and your organization. You've been having wonderful online webinars that are all recorded and available. So I encourage, you know, all of you to go back and look at this, because wonderful information has been shared in terms of how to support dual language learners, how to read to them, how to just foster, again, that relationship with families.
Yes, wonderful, thanks. And we have another question, again, specifically about infants and toddlers and related to what you just shared, Patricia. I will share that we recently did a webinar that was specific to infants and toddlers. So you can go back to our website under the distance learning webinars, and you can find the recording and resources and slides for that one as well, to get specific ideas for that age group. Let's see, we still have a few more questions. One question about how to address a child's name that the family says has no significant meaning.
So I was just, you know, laughing because Marisol and I had this conversation around my name. She's got this beautiful story about her name and how she was named after a patron saint and so forth. And I'm not so fond actually about the story of my name, which I won't get into. But I think that even still, like, families, there might not be this huge grand story, right? But the fact that they selected that particular name as opposed to the other billion choices that they had, there's a reason why. Either they liked the way that it sounded, it rolled off their tongue, they were able to pronounce it in both languages. All of that is still part of the story that children need to be aware of.
Yes. Let's see, there's a question about screen time. how much screen time are you allowing for each day to present content? What platform do you recommend? Seesaw, Nearpod, etc.
Right, and I think for us, it's not that we're necessarily suggesting use one versus the other. I think many sites have specific regulations that they fall under where they're actually told use this particular platform, whether it's Google, whether it's Seesaw. I know other people are using the Class Dojo. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I know Seesaw is a popular one, so we don't necessarily have a recommendation. I think use one that you feel comfortable with, that your families have access to. And what I have heard is that rather than having 20 different ways that you can connect with your families, really sticking to one or two that meet the needs of those who have access to technology versus those who don't, and finding ways to be consistent with your communication with families.
Yes. And also related to screen time and use of technology. Also, if you go back to our website with the recorded webinars, we did one that was specifically about using technology with young children, and we had specialists on the use of technology with children come from New America and PBS Kids to share information about best practices. So you can find that information there as well. Let's see. Okay. One question about that they love being connected with their parents and want to help them out. Will you be able to walk us on how to model reading? I enjoyed watching how you modeled the reading for us. I would like to have more ideas and tips. We also have a webinar specifically about read-alouds with young children. And so there's the one on infants and toddlers, and there's one on preschool age children. So you might want to check that out as well. Let's see. I think, okay, here there's a question about, are teachers considering looping with their children a second year to continue the face-to-face relationships they began last year in the event the year does not begin with on-site learning? Do you guys have information about that?
It's really dependent on the different programs and the different institutions and the different districts and the way that each of them kind of work together. So I don't know that we necessarily have a recommendation in terms of looping or not looping. But what we do know is that the strategies that we are sharing, that we shared today, we intentionally chose those that could be used now or could be used in the beginning of a new cycle.
And Carolyn, what I also wanted to just go back to your question that was asked around the read alouds on our website, seal.org. We do also have a variety of videos, some that are specific to preschool as well. And one of them does talk about some of those key aspects and elements of how to engage in an interactive read aloud with young children.
Great. I'm going to add here our website for the distance learning webinars. I just added it here, but we'll also send it when we send the follow-up email. We'll send you the website for our webinars as well as the resources. And then I see Stephanie added the article for New America in the chat. And then I can add here the webinars that we have. So, so we're getting close to 3 o'clock. I just want to thank you all once again for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the webinar. And I just want to remind you that we'll be sending out a follow-up email in the next few days that includes the slides, the recording of the webinar, the resources, and also a certificate of attendance that you can download. So thank you to our wonderful presenters. I hope that you all enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.